and in this video we will talk about firepower. Now I've already covered firepower, I think a long time back, maybe I don't know, maybe close to 2 years back when I was preparing for my CCIE, and you'll probably find a set of videos on my channel. If you go down to the playlist section, you'll find probably 2-3 videos over here, right? But back then I kind of set up firepower not entirely on GNS3. I kind of set it up on my VMware Fusion, and I connected it to my GNS3 and did a little bit of roundabout way, right? And since then people have been asking me how do I set up firepower in a very simpler way so that we can study all the various features which firepower brings to the table. So I thought I'll make this video on that. Let me also draw your attention towards a playlist called Cisco ASA. I would this is a pretty cool playlist. You can check it out as well. A lot of features which I've covered here, and ASA is still being used, so all these are very much relevant, right? Cool. So this is my lab. I've set up this lab, and I'll take you through on how to set this up, and also what we'll do is at the end of the video we will first we'll talk a little bit about firepower, the product, and the how it functions and all of that. A brief, I would say. It's not going to be a very in-depth analysis because firepower is a very huge topic, or the appliance has a lot of features, and probably there are books, Cisco Press books, which cover everything in detail. But my intention is to just get you guys started, people who don't know about firepower, just give you an introduction, and then quickly tell you how you can set up a lab, right, on Eve, something like this, and we'll do a bootstrap configuration as well, right? So we'll bootstrap our FMC, we'll bootstrap our FTD as well, right? Cool. That being said, let's jump onto my cool whiteboard here. And yeah, so what's the history of firepower, right? So think of firepower as a next generation firewall, right? The word firepower is a bit misleading, so let me debunk that. When you talk about firepower, the first thing which need to come to your head is the next generation firewall, right? Now there are a bunch of terms which you'll come across, right? You will come across something called FTD, you'll come across something called FMC, and the other one is going to be NJIPS, right? Now I'll not get into the form factor of each of these. This is basically your actual firewall, right? Which is actually doing the filtering and stuff. FMC is the management center, right? It's only for managing your set of firewalls, right? It's the place, or it's a web GUI where you can go and configure your FTDs and do have like a centralized management. NJIPS is basically the IPS component of you can say the whole firepower architecture. Right now, a little bit of history here. So Cisco, I think if you remember, there was a company called SourceFire, right? And Cisco acquired this company a few years back, and that's how this particular product came into the Cisco ecosystem, right? Now, over the years, Cisco, I think, has tried to because Cisco already had what we call as, so this was here, but Cisco already had what we call as the ASA, right? A very powerful set of firewalls. So I think over the last few years, there has been a good effort to, a lot of investment has gone into combining or streamlining or putting both of these together, right? Because SourceFire brings in a lot of what we say, the IPS capabilities, right? Whereas this is your very traditional L2, L3 firewall, right? So it would be great advantages if we can combine both of these to make a very powerful, what we call as the next generation firewall, right? So that is a bit of history. Now, talking a little bit about, let me just get rid of this. So now that you know what is the FTD, FMC, and NJIPS, from a management perspective, there is actually many other options as well, not just FMC. So because there might be a lot of customers who would want different management options based on their necessities, right? So there is what we call as an on-box management as well. It's a very lightweight manager, I would say, which is called as FDM, Firepower Device Manager. You can also use your ASDM to some extent, right? And you might be confused. Okay, Joel, you were talking about firepower. Now why are you using ASDM? ASDM is just a management tool for ASA. So how are you using it here? So I'll talk about that. I'll debunk that in a minute. But for now, just keep in mind, if you want to have like an on-box functionality, you can use FDM or ASDM. But it probably will not have like a complete A to Z configuration possibility, or you can't configure A to Z everything, right? It supports like a subset of features, which you can configure on your next generation firewalls, which is the FTD firewalls, right? Then you have what we call as a cloud solution. It's pretty much new, I would say, and Cisco, I think recently came up with this. It's called basically Cisco Defense Orchestrator, CDO. Again, the last time I checked, there were, it supported a bit of more like a subset of features. I'm not sure as of now what is the status. Probably you can check the documentation. But if you want a cloud-based management solution, then CDO is a good option, right? And the last one is, your centralized way. Now for centralized, what we have is the most popular one, which is your FMC, right? Firepower Management Center. And it has a very, very good list of features, which means, it can configure probably everything in your FTD, right? This is more like on-premise centralized manager and used by majority of the customers. Awesome. So, now talking about, I was telling you about, I'll try to debunk this thing about ASAs, right? So, initially when the acquisition happened, the first quarter or second quarter, the whole idea was to bring it together, right? The ASAs and SourceFire. So, what Cisco did was initially they kind of integrated Firepower with the existing, ASA by having like separate software images. So you can think of like one box, one software module called ASA and the other software module called Firepower, right? And they basically called this as the integration of ASA with Firepower, right? Which is the very first step towards bringing these together, right? So in this case, the ASA still runs its regular ASA image, right? While at the same time having a separate software module for your Firepower, right? So how this was working, this was basically your ASA would do all your L2, L3 stuff, right? All your L2, L3 functionality, routing, switching, NAT, and all of that. And your Firepower would then, do things like your IPS, because that is known for that, right? Or URL filtering and so on, like a bunch of other IPS related features, intrusion prevention system, right? But you see, this is not a very good way because managing this was becoming difficult, right? Now you have to manage this guy separately and manage this guy separately. You can't have a single manager for both, right? That possibility was not there. ASTM was used for managing this guy and probably FMC was used for managing this guy. So it wasn't a very good approach, or wasn't a very scalable, and probably it was creating a lot of issues with the NOC team, right, managing these guys. So that's where, they kind of moved towards combining both of these into what we call as, or combining the ASA code with the Firepower code. And this kind of moved towards what we call as of today as the FTD image, right? FXOS basically. So your Firepower Threat Defense, right? It's the more unified image that can run both on your ASA firewalls and your Firepower appliances, right? So ASA firewalls, which are your older firewalls, and Firepower appliances as well, right? So with this, the main advantage of this is that with this unified image, you no longer need to kind of upgrade or maintain separate firewall images for, same physical platform, right? Like you did with this weird approach before that. Now this one specific unified image provides everything: L2, L3, IPS, your malware protection, intrusion prevention, URL filtering, everything. It provides, it's one single unified image. Right? So that is a little bit of history around there about, how the acquisition happened and what is the current strategy. So we are right now in that place where we are using the unified image. Now we can quickly look at a little bit of the products here. I think I have a bunch of pages open here. So if you go down to next generation firewall and list down the products, you will basically see all the appliances which I was talking about. So you have both the hardware form factors as well as virtual ones. So this is the one which we will be using, the virtual one, obviously, because we are doing it on Eve. But you have, various form factors where hardware form factors depending on what throughput you want. Right? Now, from a ASA perspective as well, like I was saying, you have the option, like I was saying, you can run the FTD image directly on the ASA as well as of now. So the unified image, so you have all of these options as well over there, right? A lot of ASA firewalls. Now that you understood that, we are talking mainly about from the ASA and the firepower, right? They both combine together to form this cool NGFW kind of like a appliance or a very advanced firewall, right? What else? So now let's look a little bit about the architectures. I think I have a page here probably. Okay, so maybe not. Maybe let me write it down. So there are a couple of interesting things again. So I just told you about, SourceFire and Cisco, right? So our SourceFire was from where our, your firepower came into existence. And these guys had the ASA. Now if you look at the code underneath, right? This was mainly using what we call as the SNOT. SNOT, if you can anytime go and check, if you can Google, you will basically see it's a free open source network intrusion detection system, right? And IPS as well. So it's more like a IDS and IPS, right? It basically, think of it like it has thousands of rules which can kind of like prevent, which have been written for various kinds of, various kinds of vulnerabilities, web vulnerabilities, and so on, so that it can, kind of detect if there is a hack happening or if there is a, anomaly in your network, right? So it's open source actually, right? But your firepower kind of uses a commercial version of SNOT, right? Because if it was using open source, then we all could build our own firepower, right? So the SNOT also has a commercial version to it, and firepower basically uses that. Now what this brings to the table is that, you have things like I was saying, you have your IPS, you have your IDS, no question there, right? Detection and blocking, and it is powered by what we call as Talos, or Cisco's, intelligence security threat group, right? With like thousands, maybe close to 1,000 Cisco security researchers. They work day in and day out to update the rules and come up with the latest threats and all of that, right? So that functionality is there. Then we have what we call as the network discovery. I really love this feature. I mean, network discovery is a very intelligent way where, the firepower is looking at the network data and trying to figure out what kind of application application is this, right? It's looking at the data and trying to figure out what kind of application it is, or who is the user who is using it, right? What is the operating system? Basically, it's fingerprinting, right? Fingerprinting the host, fingerprinting the user, fingerprinting the application. So that kind of a feature you have. Then you have URL, filtering, where you can basically block, sites, monitor sites, right? So that is possible. Then you have, along with the AMP, advanced malware protection, right? We probably have it running. I think I have it running on my laptop as well, somewhere here. So you have your AMP, advanced malware protection, which kind of in real time, it is able to block the malwares with your files and all of that, right? And what else? SI, security intelligence, right? Again, this is related to, your reputation of various IPs and URLs, right? So, Cisco kind of maintains a list of, URLs and IPs which are regularly updated, and there is some health score against these IPs, and whenever you are getting a request from such a, such kind of an, IP, you can kind of block request from that IP and so on, right? Or if your user is trying to connect to a website which has a very bad score, it means that many people have kind of like, raised a flag against that, right? So you would really don't want your client to connect to it, so you can like block those requests. So there are a bunch of features which this node brings to the table, and that's basically covered there. Now, like I was saying, Cisco already had ASA. So what these guys had was basically, you can say it's called as a Linux engine, right? It's a very cool name, but I don't know really the full form of it. Lina engine is basically, you can think of it as the ASA code, right? Basically the ASA code, the L2, L3 code, which basically does your regular, firewalling, right? Now, what does Lina have? What are the features? You can think of it as your L2, L3 networking, right? All your, routing, your NAT, your VPN, and all of that. ACLs, right? All of that. Then you have your failover. You have your clustering, right? All of this I have covered extensively in my ASA video, so you can checked there as well. So all of your traditional firewall features like a failover, clustering, and all of that is basically covered in your Lena architecture, right? So that's like a little bit of from an architecture perspective, how all of this is coming together. Cool. What else? Let's also talk a little bit about deployment and what else? The interfaces, because that's something very important as well. So when you talk about deployment and interfaces, deployment, there are two different modes for deployment, right? One is called as the routed mode, other one is called as the transparent mode. Routed mode for your L3, right? When you have, think of it like basically my topology here, right? I have, where's my topology? Yeah, so when I have like two different subnets connected on each of the side, I want some kind of a routing to be done at the same time. I want my FTD to do a bit of routing at the same time. I want it to do all the L2, L3 filtering, IPS and all of that. Then I can use like a routed deployment. Transparent mode is when you want to kind of use it in a L2 or kind of like a L2 deployment, right? Where both the sites, right? Both the sites, that is gigabit 0/0 and 0/1, they'll be in the same subnet, right? Right now they are in different because it's a routed mode. But if you want like at a layer 2, you want to plug in your FTD and do some kind of filtering, then you can use the transparent mode. From an interface if you look, there are again different modes here. A couple of important ones are your routed and what we call as a bridge. So I think that is very much evident, right? A routed interface, a bridged interface is for L2. Then apart from this, you also have, I think I have it here probably mentioned, I'm not sure. Yeah, here we go. So you have, apart from this routed switched, which is nothing but bridged or whatever, you also have 4 other stuff. So you have what we call as the inline pair and inline pair with tap, right? And then we have your passive and passive span, right? So let's talk a little bit about the inline pair first. So inline pair, what happens is you have the two interfaces are kind of bound together and deployed inline to work together as a, think of it as a layer 2 bump, right? So it's going to be something like this. So you have your firewall here, right? This is your firewall, and this is your two interfaces. These two interfaces are basically clubbed or bundled together, and it basically acts as if it is nothing but a bump in a wire, right? Like this. You have your actual network. It can be used in both your, I think I've listed that as well here. You can see it can be used both as a routed or a transparent deployment. That is, the router can be used in a bridged mode, or it can be used as a router, right? The firewall can be used either of this when you're using this as the interface mode, right? That's a compatibility. Only thing is, it is going to act as a bump in the wire. So if some kind of a rule matches, then it is going to drop the traffic. So if you have written an intrusion prevention rule to prevent traffic from, say, Facebook, right? You don't want your users to access Facebook, then the traffic will pass through this device, right? It will be just like a straight, it will act as if it's a straight wire, but if there is a match in the policy, then it is going to drop the traffic. Now, the second thing is your inline pair with tap. The difference here is, it is not going to drop the traffic. It will be still inline, right? It will be still inline to the traffic, but it is with the tap, so it won't drop the traffic. Instead, what it'll do is it'll just send a copy of the packets, basically it will send a copy of the packets to where? To the snort engine, right? Which is there inside the FTD. So it will send a copy of the packets whenever some kind of a intrusion prevention rule is matched, right? Then you can check out from the snort's engine perspective. You can then check, okay, do you think maybe snort would have dropped the traffic, right? So this rule is kind of this mode is generally used when you are kind of testing some policies. You really don't want, in a production network, you don't want the firewall to drop the packets because the firewall is running. But at the same time, you want to do some testing, then you can kind of use this mode, right? Passive mode. Passive, this allows your FTD to monitor a copy of kind of like traffic from a span port, right? So let me just give the distinction. So this is what we talked about. This is your these are your IPS modes, right? The first one is inline pair, where some dropping will happen if the rule matches. Now the second thing which I was telling was your inline with tap, where the dropping won't happen. And the third one is your passive, right? So in passive, if this is your firewall, you probably have a switch here, right? So maybe the switch is inline, in the traffic direction. Maybe this is how the traffic is flowing in your network, right? So probably what you could do is maybe probably the output of this you can connect it to the FTD, and you can do some analysis, or basically you will obviously not, even if you drop the traffic, there is no point, right? Because this is the inline which is in the network. So you'll basically be sending copies of the packet to the firewall to do its investigation, and probably you can look at the reports and the dashboards to understand what kind of traffic it was. So that's passive. It's called passive because it is not in line with the traffic. Even if you're dropping it on firewall, there is no point because the traffic would have actually passed, right? So that is your passive. And then you have passive with remote span, where this is where you had your switch directly connecting into your firewall, but it could be a possibility that you might have maybe few hops here, and there might be a switch, and you would want to send that packet to this guy. So you can do that using a RSpan, right, a remote span. So that's your fourth option of the interface modes, right? So that's why you have it here. So pretty interesting table here. You can see the traffic gets dropped only in either of the first three options. The rest of the times, the traffic doesn't really get dropped, right? So it's only mainly for my investigation point of view, right? Alright, so that's about that. Now I think I have one more diagram here. Might look complicated, but don't worry, it's pretty simple. What I wanted to show you here is this is how, right, the Lena engine and the Snort engine. The Lena engine is your ASA engine, and the Snort engine is the firepower, or the engine which came as part of the firepower, right, and how they both work together. There's a very good topology here, a very good diagram here to explain the same. Right, so here, pretty simple. So what we have is, we have the Lena engine here at the bottom, right? Compare this diagram with that, right? So you have the Lena engine here, and the top one is your Snort instance. So how, in a brief way, how this works is, you have your interface over here, and the traffic is coming in. The packet is first handled by the Lena engine, which is here at the bottom left. So Lena checks whether the connection, the packet which is coming in is part of, if it is part of an existing flow, right? Maybe it's a flow, right? When let's say there is a TCP connection between your client and some remote server, and the packets are continuously coming in. So the new packets will obviously be part of the flow which is already there. So if it's a part of the flow, then the Lena will kind of use this fast path mechanism to kind of skip the checks, bypass the checks. Right, and it will directly bypass it directly to this. So that's why you have an arrow mark here, right? Because you don't want to repeatedly run these checks for every packet, because it's already done at the first packet of the flow. But after that, you can bypass it. Now, if it is not part of an existing connection, then they are obviously sent to the next step, which is coming down here. And if it is also part of some kind of a VPN tunnel, because your FTD supports VPNs, right? You can do remote VPN, site-to-site VPNs, and all of that. So if it is part of a VPN, then the VPN decryption basically happens here. Once the decryption happens, then your NAT and all of that kicks in, right? So that's cool. Then we have what we call as the pre-filter policy. Now, pre-filter policy we can configure on FTD firepower. Basically, this policy, if I have to tell you in simple ways, it's just there to improve the performance. So what it does is, how does it improve the performance? It does by kind of matching certain traffic, right? It's basically doing some additional checks or pre-checks before even processing the packets. So once we do this pre-checks, right, as part of this pre-filter policy, we can configure this, all of this from the GUI, right? So once you configure this policy, it can either analyze, right? Either we can send it to analyze by, we can send it to the Snort engine, right, for further analysis. Or if you have configured something like, okay, if the packet is coming from this particular IP address, drop it, that pre-filter will drop it here only. So you don't have to really waste your FTD resources for sending it all this way and coming it down, and you'll basically save up on FTD resources. So you can define what kind of subnets and what packets you really want your FTD to kind of filter out. So it's an additional check, I would say, right? So once this is done, once the pre-filter policy is carried out or checked, the next is your L3 and L4 ACLs, the 5-tuple ACLs, right? Which means it will check your source IP, destination IP, source port, destination port, and the protocols. So that check happens here. Then it is passed on to this DAC. DAC is your data acquisition engine or the module, right? So it sends it to this, sends it basically to this node using this DAC. And once it comes to there, there are a bunch of things which happen here. You have something called L2, L4 decoding, right? So, excuse me. Yeah. So this decoding is more like defragmentation and doing things like TCP, building your TCP segments or TCP streams. Basically all of that can be done, at this particular layer from L2 to L4, right? Then you have SI. SI, we already talked about it, right? Earlier, it's basically a list of it's a security intelligence, right? So it's basically an IP list against which the packet is checked, and Cisco Talos kind of keeps it updated, and if there is some harmful IPs, it will blacklist those IPs, and using this engine we can drop those packets. Then we can check for some SSL decryption rule. If there is a rule that requires a packet to be decrypted, for some, network visibility. If you see, one of the main problem of network visibility is encryption, right? And the packet gets encrypted, it's very difficult to identify if the packet is a malware packet or it's a good packet. So if SSL decryption is allowed in your environment, then probably you can do that here, and you'll get the plain packet after this for checking the rest of the steps. So there's an option for doing SSL decryption. Then you have some kind of a DNS and URL filtering also happening. You can say that, okay, if it is coming from this DNS, basically FTD is looking at the DNS requests, right, and matching them against certain feeds which are provided by your security intelligence here. But this is not URL filtering. This is just a predefined set of DNS or URLs which you can kind of filter against. Then you have your identity policy, right? Policy, again, it's optionally configured using some kind of a captive portal, right? I think Firepower, I have not tried this before, but Firepower has some captive portal features where you can, kind of identify the user as well. The L7 ACLs after that, right? Layer 7, basically for your application ID, and this is the URL filtering, where the actual URL filtering happens, right? You can define your URLs, your custom URLs or standard URLs. You can say, don't allow users to log into Facebook and stuff like that, so you can define it here. QoS classification, right? Just note that the enforcement actually happens here at the bottom. The classification only happens at the top. Then you have your network discovery. This is what I was talking about earlier. It's a pretty cool feature where we are trying to extract information from the network traffic, right, as to what kind of a user is this, right? Who is the user? What application is he using? And then on what host is he using and stuff like that. Then you have the file policy mainly, because from IPS perspective, there are two types of interesting policies. One is your intrusion policy, other one is your file policy. Right, the file policy is mainly nothing but using AMP to figure out if a file is malicious, and if it is, it can kind of like delete, it can not load the file, not download the file and stuff like that, right? So the preventing malware which can be transported using files and stuff. The next is snort rules, where the actual intrusion policies are kicked in, right? And that's basically matched here. So all of this, whatever I'm showing you, all the blocks, all of this can be configured from your FMC. All the policies corresponding to each of these blocks can be configured. And the section at the bottom is mainly your enforcement. So once it goes from there, it comes here, and then it is nothing but updating the flows, putting the NAT if you want to do, right, at the egress interface you want to do a NAT, then you can do that. Changing the IP headers. QoS enforcement happens here. This is what I was telling. VPN encryption, right, because the packet has to go out now. then the L2 and L3 routing, L3 routing or L2 lookup, either of that can happen, and then we send the packet out, right? So that's mainly it, guys. From a architecture perspective, just wanted to give you a quick view. I think still it took like 30 minutes to explain that. Now what we'll do is we'll do a quick bootstrap, like I was telling, we'll take this particular topology and we'll boot both of these guys up, and we'll make sure that they are configured with some default settings, and we will also make sure that FTD is able to talk to FMC, right? So let's get on to that. Let me pause the video and let's get on to that part, folks. So we'll start with FTD and FMC on our Eve NG. So the first task would be for us to bootstrap the appliances, right? Which means before that, let me just show you how you can install these two appliances on Eve. Pretty simple, straightforward, right? So you go down to your Eve page, and so you have a couple of things to be noted down here. One is the QEMU image namings, and if you go down to this page, you'll find Firepower 6 over here, and for FTD and FMC, the images should be renamed. The QCOT images should be renamed to virtual images, right? This is how you need to upload it to your Eve folder, to the QEMU folder of Eve, right? The other stuff is on the how-to documentation. You'll basically find a very detailed documentation on your Firepower 6 images, right? It basically tells you the format of the images to be downloaded. I obviously can't provide you guys with the images, but because it's illegal, right? But I can only guide you with the steps. So you need to download these images from your CCO. I think I'm using, if I'm not wrong, I'm using the latest image, so it should be 6.6 probably. Let me see. Yeah, so I'm using, I think, this one, 6.6.0, and I'm downloading the QCO2. Similar, this is for FTD. The same thing you gotta do for FMC as well. But once you download those images, they have given a very straightforward method. It's nothing. You just need to, create a folder inside your QEMU, right? You'll have to do it for FTD and another folder for FMC. And once you have two folders, you just need to move your or upload or SFTP or images which you downloaded from CCO into those two folders, right? And you'll have to rename into the Virtuo, which I earlier showed you in the QEMU namings. So once you have that, obviously fix the permissions, right? That is something we do traditionally for Eve, right? You need to fix the permissions. You have that command to fix the permissions. So once that is done, you're done with the Eve stuff. You should be able to see that particular device. Like when you go to add node, if you do Firepower, you can see it should be visible here, right? So I have that done. I've done that part, and I've set up a simple topology. This is my FTD. This is my FMC here. On the left hand side, whatever you see, this is basically my internal to my network, right? My branch. Let's say this is my branch. Let's say I'm running a company and I have a small network with a branch, right? And this is my ISP to which I want to connect. My FTD is going to be like at the border, right? Providing the firewalling. Now the three things, all the green, the 4 IP addresses mentioned here. In fact, the green colored ones are the management ones, right? So for you have your .50 for FMC, you have .51 for your FTD, and the default gateway is going to be .1. On the inside of the FTD, you're going to have the 10.1 network, and on the outside it's 54.1, right? Cool. So now let's go down to so I've just enabled. So you need to right click and you enable the appliance. It's going to take some time for it to come up. But once it comes up, this is what you'll be able to see, right? So let me just grab this for a minute. Sweet. So once you have this, first we'll start with bootstrapping my FMC, right? Let's see what configuration needs to go in here. So you got to log in with the default credentials is admin, password being capital A D M I N 123. There you go. So that's the default username passwords. Now once you're logged in there, let's go to the expert console, right? So once you're on the expert console, this is where you need to configure your network, which means we'll have to run sudo configure network. So this is basically configuring my network here. So I'll have to put in the password again. And it's going to ask me if I want to configure IPv4, yes. What is the IPv4? 192.168.187.50, I believe. Yeah, that's my IP. The mask remains the same. Default gateway is 192.168.187.1. We'll go with that. Are the settings correct? Yes. No, I don't want IPv6. And there you go. So it has updated the configuration now. The NIC is up, I guess, which is okay. It's still not giving me the this thing. It's still not active, so probably let's wait for. I'm gonna pause the video for it to update the network configuration. All right, looks like it is completed. You should see this session, or you should see the terminal turn into something like this. It's going to give you the IP address where you got to log in. So I'm going to go to my Windows machine, right? You see I have a Windows machine here, like my management PC. I'm going to go to that Windows machine and try to log into this particular guy. So let's go in and let's do HTTPS. What is the IP? 192.168.187.50. There you go. So because it's self-signed certificate, it's going to screen, but that's fine. So let's proceed. Okay, so there you go. The FMC is asking me to log in. So let's put the default username admin, password being admin123, which is the default. Okay, it's logging me in. Okay, so the first thing it's gonna ask you for a new password, right? So you'll have to change that. Let me put it as admin for now. Hope. Okay, so it's having a bunch of things to be satisfied. So let's do. So it needs to have 8 characters, 1 uppercase, 1 digit, and okay, a bunch of things. So let's go and fix that. Still okay. So let's probably let me do one thing. Okay, so I think that should be good. Let's do this. All right, so there you go. So the password looks good. Let's go to the next step. It's gonna ask me to accept some agreement. I'm gonna accept it. So a bunch of configurations you can see here. The fully qualified domain name. So I'm gonna say what? bitsplace.com. Right, so the configure IP address, this looks good. Umbrella DNS, it's not reachable for now, but that's alright because I don't have internet connectivity. Default NTP, I'm not going to change that, so I'm going to say finish. Let's wait for that. Alright, so once it comes up, it looks this way. I mean, you have an option to switch to the light theme. I think this is something new which has come up, but I really like the classic theme, so I've switched back to the classic theme. But you can try this. It kind of goes with your DNAC and all of that kind of a GUI, right? So, but yeah, so you can use either of the themes. This is how it shows up. There's nothing for now, no data, but that's fine because we haven't really brought in the FTD yet, right? So what we'll do is let's go and bootstrap the FTD now, right? So we'll do that. So let's go to my FTD here, which is the second one. Let me just grab this. There you go. So let's say admin, and the same admin123 will be the username and password. So first is it's going to ask me to accept agreement. Basically you go on pressing the enter until it goes to the bottom. There are a bunch of, I would obviously recommend you to read them if you're actually deploying this in the production. But for now, I'm just going to bypass all of that. It's quite lengthy. Okay, so there you go. I think we're almost done. So it should give me an option to I think it's the next one. Yeah. So there you go. So it's going to tell either you can accept it by typing in yes, or you can even press enter. Then you will have to put in your new password, right, and then confirm. I think I pressed enter for a longer time, so let me just now let me put in the password. There you go. So I've put in my password. I've confirmed, put in the new password. So it's going to ask me for IP address now. So I'm going to say yes. I don't want IPv6. So I'm going to say no. It's going to be manual. Yes, I'm going to configure IPv4 manual approach. 192.168.187.51, and the mask is going to be fine. The gateway is 192.168.187.1. Looks good. And fully qualified domain name, I'm gonna say FTD probably. Enter a comma separated list of servers. I'm gonna say this is your DNS, right? So I'm gonna say 8.8.8. And enter a comma domain search names. I'm gonna say bitsplease.com. And now it will take some time to bring all of these configurations to effect. Let's wait for that to finish. All right, so then it's gonna say, do you want to manage the device locally? Even the FTD itself comes with a local GUI to manage, but I really want to manage this using my FMC, right? So I'm gonna say no to this. Okay, it's taking some time. And then it's going to ask me, do you want to configure the firewall in the routed mode or the transparent mode? I'm going to go for the default for now, the routed mode. We can change this later as well. All right, so that looks good. So what do we do next? Let's check if any managers are connected. So I'm going to do show managers. And we should not have anything for now because we have not configured it. Right, so we will do that in a while. Let's see what mode we have. Show firewall. It should give us the mode. You can see it's a router mode, and we can also do show network. I guess it will give all the settings which we have put in. You can see FTD, you can see the DNS stuff, you can see the gateway and all of that. Right, so the management port is 8305. So it will talk to the FMC using that port, which looks good. So all of these configurations have gone in. Let's see what else. You can also get into the Linux console or the Linux terminal by using the command expert, and it should switch. There you go. We are inside Linux now, right? So if I do something like ipconfig, right, it should give you the management IP and all of that. So this is your literally, because your whole FTD FMC, it's built on Linux, right? So this is how you can access the Linux. I'm gonna exit out of that. Now coming back to, there's probably one more thing we'll have to do for bootstrapping, which is configuring the managers, right? Which is connecting. So we'll have to connect our FTD to the FMC. While doing that, it is going to use the TCP port 8305. We just now saw that port, right? So what is the configuration for doing that? Pretty straightforward again. Let's go to the FTD and let's say configure configure manager. So you say add, right? Let's see, that's correct. Yeah. So it's add, address basically. Configure manager. Does it stand for address? I think it's add. Okay. You'll have to put the address. In our case, it is 192.168.187.50, right? So let's do that. There's an error. Okay. So the reason is because, give me a second. So you'll have to put let's do a question mark. Yeah. You'll have to put a key, right? So let's use the key like something like Cisco. You'll have to put a secret key, and that has to match on the other side as well. So otherwise, it's mainly for authentication purpose, right? You don't want any random FTD coming and connecting to your FMC. So just a small check over there. So let's wait for that to complete. Alright, so looks like that is done. So let's now go down to my, before that, let me show you this. If I do show managers now, it should show the state as pending, right? Because we haven't yet added the device on the FMC. Let's go to FMC. So this is my dashboard. Let's go to devices, device management. And on here, we could directly add the device or probably create a small group, right? Because you might have multiple branches as well. And you would want, if you want only one single FMC to manage all the branches, you can do that as well. In which case you would want to create a group or, so that seems more a better way to do it. So let's go and create a group, and let's call this group as what? Let's say this is my bits please branches. So let's say my company is called bits please, and all the branches would basically go inside this, right? So let's create that. I'm gonna say bits please branches. Okay. So that way the group gets created. And once the group is created now we can basically go and create a device or add a device, right? So let's go and add the device, and this particular host is going to be what? 192.168.187.51, because that's my FTD. The display name, I would want something nice. I'm going to say bits please branch 1 maybe, right? The registration key, this is what you need to mention here. Remember, we put Cisco over there while registering on the other side, so we'll have to use the same thing here. This is the place where I can select the group which I just now created. And access control policy is compulsory. Since we don't have anything as of now, let's create a new one, right? And we can say bit please access control policy, right? And for now we are not going to block. Let's just put the default action as just network discovery. There you go. So we created a policy. That complete, and we have selected that licensing. So it's not allowing me to select anything now. Let's see, give me a second. Alright, so I think it's a better way to first go and enable licensing and then do this. So I'm going to just cancel this for now. Let's first go to my system and let's go to licensing. So there are two types of licensing, classic and smart. Classic licensing is the older way of Cisco licensing, right? Where it was not transferable and all of that, right? So we're not going to use that. Rather, we'll basically go down to my smart licensing, which is a better way to do this. So let's go to systems, and yeah, there you go. So smart licensing, basically Cisco gives you like around 90 days of free licenses, right? And after that you will have to actually procure. So there is something called register or evaluation mode. If you already have the license, you can click on register and you will have to put in a token. We are basically going to enable the evaluation mode. I'm going to say yes, and my 90-day evaluation mode will start now. Right, there you go. So these are the various licenses you have. Right, we'll probably talk about this, or maybe we would have already talked about this before doing this video, so you could just refer to that. But these are all the licenses which are available. And let's go down to my device management now, and we should be able to add the devices. So let's go down here. Let's say add a device. And I don't know, does it show? Maybe not. 192.168.187.51, right? The display is going to be bits please branch 1. Alright, looks good. Registration key is Cisco, and the group is basically what we created here. We have already created a policy just a few seconds ago, so I'm going to use that. And now you see we are able to select the licenses. I'm going to enable everything: malware, threat, URL filtering, right? The transport packets is also interesting. What it does is whenever IPS is hit, right, an intrusion prevention policy is hit, it's basically going to transfer some packets to my FMC for some kind of analysis, right? So we'll have to enable that. So I'm gonna register now. So it should take few seconds to register the device onto my FMC. And there you go. We have successfully added. Looks like you can see the various tasks which show up here. Right. So let me just get rid of them. There you go. So we have the device here, which is 192, right? The bits please branch 1, right? Which we just now added. And now if you go back to my guy here and run this show managers, we should be able to see that this would have changed the state from pending to completed. So my FTD is now associated with my FMC, and it is ready to be configured using the FMC, right? Further, you need not always use this VNC console. If you wanna probably you can go down to my PC and probably switch on my Putty, right? And you can go down to 192.168. Say if you wanna connect to FMC, I can do this. So I can log in as admin, and it's a bit slow. Alright, and the password being, which I changed just now, so it's gonna be, there you go, yeah. So you can access your FTD and FMC from, via SSH from your local machine as well. You don't have to use that VNC always. So that's it about bootstrapping your FTD and FMC. What we did was we kind of brought it up. We brought up the FTD, we brought up the FMC, and we did the basic configurations on each of them, and we connected our FTD to my FMC, right? So, alright, hope that was useful.